Mr. Chairman, this is an occasion peculiarly meet for the digging up of pleasant reminiscences concerning literary folk. Therefore, I will drop lightly into history myself. Standing here on the shore of the Atlantic and contemplating certain of its biggest literary billows, I am reminded of a thing which happened to me some 15 years ago, when I had just succeeded in stirring up a little Nevadian literary ocean puddle myself, whose spoon flakes were beginning to blow California words. I started an inspection tramp through the southern mines of California. I was callow and conceited, and I resolved to try the virtue of my nom de plume. I very soon had an opportunity. I knocked at a miner's lonely log cabin in the foothills of the Sierras just at nightfall. It was snowing at the time. A jaded, melancholy man of 50, barefooted, opened to me. When he heard my nom de plume, he looked more dejected than before. He let me in, pretty reluctantly, I thought, and after the customary bacon and beans, black coffee, and a hot whiskey, I took a pipe. This sorrowful man had not said 3 words up to this time. Now he spoke up and said in the voice of one who is secretly suffering, "You're the 4th. I'm a-going to move." "The 4th what?" said I. "The 4th literary man that's been here in 24 hours. I'm a-going to move." "You don't tell me," said I. "Who were the others?" "Mr. Longfellow, Mr. Emerson, and Mr. Oliver Wendell Holmes. Dad fetched the lot." You can easily believe I was interested. I supplicated. 3 hot whiskeys did the rest. And finally the melancholy miner began. Said he, "They came here just at dark yesterday evening, and I let them in, of course. Said they were going to Yosemite. They were a rough lot, but that's nothing. Everybody looks rough that travels afoot. Mr. Emerson was a seedy little bit of a chap, red-headed. Mr. Holmes was as fat as a balloon. He weighed as much as 300 and had double chins all the way down to his stomach. Mr. Longfellow was built like a prize fighter. His head was cropped and bristly, like as if he had a wig made of hairbrushes. His nose lay straight down his face like a finger, with the end joint tilted up. They had been drinking, I could see that. And what queer talk they used. Mr. Holmes inspected the cabin, then he took me by the buttonhole, and says he, "Through the deep caves of thought, I hear a voice that sings, 'Build thee more stately mansions, O my soul.' Says I can't afford it, Mr. Holmes, and moreover, I don't want to. Blamed if I liked it pretty well either, coming from a stranger that way. However, I started to get out my bacon and beans when Mr. Emerson came and looked on a while, and then he takes me aside by the buttonhole and says, 'Give me agates for my meat, give me cantharides to eat. From air and ocean bring me foods, from all zones and latitudes.' Says I, 'Mr. Emerson, if you'll excuse me, this ain't no hotel.' You see, it sort of riled me. I warn't used to the ways of literary swells. But I went on a-sweating over my work, and next comes Mr. Longfellow and buttonholes me and interrupts me. Says he, 'Honor be to Mudjekeewis, you shall hear how Powpuckeewis.' But I broke in and says, 'I begging your pardon, Mr. Longfellow, if you'll be so kind as to hold your yop for about 5 minutes and let me get this grub ready, you'll do me proud.' Well, sir, after they'd filled up, I set out the jug. Mr. Holmes looks at it, and then he fires up all of a sudden and yells, "Flash out a stream of blood-red wine, for I would drink to other days." By George, I was getting kind of worked up. I don't deny it. I was getting kind of worked up. I turns to Mr. Holmes and says, "Look here, my fat friend, I'm a-running this shanty, and if the court knows herself, you'll take whiskey straight or you'll go dry." Them's the very words I said to him. Now, I didn't want to sass such famous literary people, but you see, they kind of forced me. There ain't nothing unreasonable about me. I don't mind a passel of guests treading on my tail 3 or 4 times, but when it comes to standing on it, it's different, and if the court knows herself, you'll take whiskey straight or you'll go dry. Well, between drinks, they'd swirl around the cabin and strike attitudes and spout. Says Mr. Longfellow, "This is the forest primeval." Says Mr. Emerson, "Here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world." Says I, "Oh, blackguard, the premises as much as you want to. It don't cost you a cent." Well, they went on drinking, and pretty soon they got out a greasy old deck and went to playing cutthroat euchre at 10 cents a corner on trust. I begun to notice some pretty suspicious things. Mr. Emerson, doubt, looked at his hand and shook his head and says, "I am the doubter and the doubt," and calmly bunched the hands and went to shuffling for a new layout. Says he, "They reckon ill who leave me out. They know not well the subtle ways I keep. I pass and deal again." Hanged if he didn't go ahead and do it, too. Oh, he was a cool one. Well, in about a minute, things were running pretty tight, but all of a sudden I see by Mr. Emerson's eye that he judged he had 'em. He had already corralled 2 tricks and each of the others one. So now he kind of lifts a little in his chair and says, "I tire of globes and aces. Too long the game is played." And down he fetched a right bower. Mr. Longfellow smiles as sweet as pie and says, "Thanks to thee, my worthy friend, for the lesson thou hast taught." And dog my cats if he didn't come down with another right bower. Well, sir, up jumps Holmes a war-whooping as usual and says, "God help them if the tempest swings the pine against the palm." And I wish I may go to grass if he didn't swoop down with another right bower. Emerson claps his hand on his bowie, Longfellow claps his on his revolver, and I went under a bunk. There was going to be trouble. But that monstrous Holmes rose up, wobbling his double chins, and says he, "Order, gentlemen. The first man that draws, I'll lay down on him and smother him." All quiet on the Potomac, you betcha. They were pretty how come you so now, and they begun to blow. Emerson says, "The bulliest thing I ever wrote was Barbara Frietchie." Says Longfellow, "It don't begin with my Bigelow papers." Says Holmes, "My Thanatopsis lays over 'em both. They mighty near ended in a fight. Didn't they wish they had some more company?" And Mr. Emerson pointed at me and says, "Is yonder squalid peasant all that this proud nursery could breed?" He was whetting his bowie on his boot, so I let it pass. Well, sir, next they took it into their heads that they would like some music, so they made me stand up and sing, "When Johnny Comes Marching Home," till I dropped. At 13 minutes past 4 this morning. That's what I've been through, my friend. When I woke at 7, they were leaving, thank goodness, and Mr. Longfellow had my only boots on and his own under his arm. Says I, "Hold on there, Evangeline. What you going to do with them?" He says, "Going to make tracks with them because lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime and depart and leave behind us footprints on the sands of time." As I said, Mr. Twain, you are the 4th in 24 hours, and I'm a-going to move. I ain't suited to a literary atmosphere. I said to the miner, Why, my dear sir, these were not the gracious singers to whom we in the world pay love and reverence and homage. These were impostors. The miner investigated me with a calm eye for a while, then said he, Ah, impostors were they? Are you? I did not pursue the subject, and since then I haven't traveled on my nom de plume enough to hurt. Such is the reminiscence I was moved to contribute, Mr. Chairman. In my enthusiasm, I may have exaggerated the details a little, but you will easily forgive me that fault, since I believe it is the first time I have ever deflected from perpendicular fact on an occasion like this.